You are good to go.
Thank you, Devan. I would like to call the Committee of the Whole meeting of March 28th, 2022 to order. Good evening, everyone. My name is JD Pachariva, Councillor and Chair of the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee. We are meeting electronically through Zoom during this declared emergency period. Members of the public may observe the proceedings by accessing the live webcast at our YouTube channel. We'll ask our Deputy Clerk, Devan Kripp, to complete a roll call of councils that we can confirm quorum. Devan, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mayor Easton.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Regima.
Present.
Councillor Russell.
Here.
Councillor Bernay. Oh, I did see him. Councillor and Deputy Mayor Miklick.
Here.
Councillor Timmers.
Here.
Councillor Reimer.
Here.
And Councillor McPherson sends his regrets tonight, but we do have quorum. And I see that Councillor Bernay has just popped on. Thank you.
And you skipped over me, Devan, but I'm here.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair.
Well, you know what? We have Councillor Bernay and I are getting a little of a complex here about Ward 2 being missed over, but that's okay. We'll get over it. We're big boys.
Okay.
In addition,
Thank
I
you.
want to take a moment to welcome the staff we have joining us today electronically for tonight's meeting. We've got our Chief Administrative Officer, Mr. Michael Kirkopoulos, Director of Finance, Administration, and Innovation, Lawrence Wagner, Associate Director of Finance, Terry Trewalla, Fire Chief, Greg Hudson, Director of Special Projects, Kathleen Dale, Director of Planning and Development, Matt Bruder, Director of Economic Development and Communications, Paul Deaney, Manager of Corporate Communications, Lillian Busnello, Economic Development Assistant, Cameron Rotz, Tourism Coordinator, Brittany Bezlewski, Director of Public Works, Mr. David Graham, Associate Director of Public Works, Ms. Jillian Harris, Manager of Capital Projects, Mr. Walter Neubauer, Associate Director of Recreation and Culture, Sarah Ain, Cultural Development Coordinator, Jessica Wilson, Exhibitions and Collections Curator, Jasmine Proto, Recreation and Events Coordinator, Lori Laird, Legislative Committee Coordinator, Deanna Phillips, and moderating and clerking tonight, we have our Manager of Legislative Services, Deputy Clerk, Devan Kripp. IT staff are in attendance if we have any missteps. Also in attendance tonight, we have Dave Ashton from MHBC Planning, Gary Scanlon, Managing Partner, Watson Associates, along with Byron Tam, also from Watson and Associates. As this is a virtual meeting, I will ask that we follow some procedures during tonight's electronic meeting. Should there be a connection or service disruption for the chair, or if quorum is lost, the chair and our deputy clerk will call a 10-minute recess to reconnect and to regain quorum. If quorum is lost, the meeting will be adjourned. If connection is lost from the chair, the deputy clerk will ask those in attendance to wait up to 10 minutes to provide the chair time to reconnect and resume the meeting. Otherwise, after that time frame, the vice chair, Councillor Reimer, I hope you're on deck. You're in the batter's box. Okay. We'll reassume the meeting until the chair has reconnected and resumes their roles. Each member of council who wishes to speak, please press the raise hand function on your video call, and the deputy clerk will track our speakers list today and then invite you to speak when I open it for comments or questions. Also, when I finish reading a motion and announce the mover, the deputy clerk will then call out the vote by reading each member of council's name out loud. Please remember to take yourself off mute during this portion of the meeting so that you can confirm if you support or oppose the motion. Also, when not speaking, please remember to put yourselves on mute. Are there any declarations of interest this evening? Okay, I see none. Do members have any amendments to the order of the agenda? Okay, I see none. So we have two statutory public meetings this evening. The purpose of the first public meeting is to receive comments from the public and consider questions regarding a draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment by MHBC Planning for Highland Park Drive in Beamsville, and the other being an update to the development charges bylaw and interest rate policy by the town of Lincoln. We will consider the staff report associated with each item immediately following each statutory public meeting. Section 34, 12, and 5120 of the Planning Act requires that before passing a zoning bylaw amendment or before a decision is made on a draft plan of subdivision, council must ensure that sufficient information and material is available to understand generally the proposal being considered. And council must hold at least one public meeting for the purpose of giving the public an opportunity to make representations regarding the proposed amendment or amendments. If a person or public body does not make an oral submission at a public meeting or make written submissions to the town of Lincoln before the zoning amendment is approved or a decision is made on the draft plan of subdivision, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of town council to the Ontario Land Tribunal, OLT. Personal information is collected under the authority of the Planning Act and may be contained in an appendix to a staff report published in the meeting agenda. Delegation list and/or minutes of the public meeting are made part of the public record. Additionally, Section 12 of the Development Charges Act, 1997, as amended, requires that before approving any amendments to the Development Charges Bylaw, council must ensure that sufficient information and material is available to understand generally the proposal being considered. And council must hold at least one public meeting for the purpose of giving the public an opportunity to make representations regarding the proposed amendment. The purpose of the meeting is to give the public an opportunity to ask questions, provide comments, and make representations on the town's proposed amendments to the Development Charges Background Study, Development Charges Bylaw, and the draft interest rate policy. The town of Lincoln is undertaking an amendment to the 2018 Development Charges Background Report and the town's 2018 Development Charges Bylaw, number 2018-93, in order to comply with changes legislated through Bill 108, More Homes, More Choices Act of 2019, and Bill 197, COVID-19 Economic Recovery Act of 2020. The Development Charges Background Report and update to the 2018 Development Charges Bylaw will also address some changes in cost per park development and water services. A thorough development charge background study will still be completed in 2023 in accordance with the Development Charges Act 1997 and associated regulations. The town of Lincoln collects this information in order to make informed decisions on the relevant issues and to notify interested parties of council's decisions. It may also be used to serve notice of an Ontario Land Tribunal, OLT, hearing. Names and addresses contained in submitted correspondence and other information will be available to the public unless the individual expressly requests the town to remove their personal information. The disclosure of this information is governed by the Municipal Freedom and Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Our first public meeting this evening is for the purpose of the draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment by MHBC Planning for Highland Park Drive in Beamsville, PD 08-22. After we have heard from our delegation, I ask that members of council hold their questions of the consultant and staff until after we have received the delegation. I will now ask our Director of Planning and Development, Mr. Matt Bruder, to provide us with some introductory comments. Matt.
Thank you, Councillor. Yep. So we have this application before us. This is for working towards the creation of proposed 11 lots for the purposes of single detached dwellings off of Highland Park Drive on the west side. It is taking up a portion of Block 70, which again is right to the west of the existing Vista Ridge subdivision, and will be tying into Highland Park Drive at this point. As you said, Councillor, just a public meeting and important to obtain input. But really what this is just looking at, there was some previous work done on a previous application when the property was under different ownership pertaining to the developable area you see here that's being occupied where the proposed development is. And the built form now comprising of single detached dwellings. So really, those are my only comments at this time. Thanks for the opportunity, Councillor.
Thank you very much, Matt. So moving into our delegations, we have one individual that requested to be included in this public hearing. Please note delegations may speak for a maximum of 5 minutes. Once we have received the delegation, committee will transition directly into the report and subsequent motion. Our delegation for this item is Dave Aston from MHBC Planning. Dave, please go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening, Councillor, members of committee. Thanks for the opportunity to be here this evening. Just a brief presentation this evening. Again, thanks to Mr. Bruder for the introductory comments. The application has been made and is under review by the town and agencies. I would note that we did have a neighborhood information session as well, where I believe 2 residents were in attendance and had some questions, so we provided some information in that regard. And all of that is, leading to the consolidation of comments for consideration in the future by committee and council. So I just want to share a bit about the proposal, some of the background information this evening, and then happy to respond to any questions that committee may have. Next slide, please. So the subject lands are designated residential in the official plan and permit the proposed use of the lands for single detached residential uses. The lands are currently split zoned, RD, which allows existing uses, and then R1 zone, which permits the single detached dwellings. And that primarily relates to the portion of lands that would be covered under the existing plan of subdivision. Next slide. This provides an overview of the applications. So the zoning bylaw amendment is required to permit single detached residential uses on a portion of the lands. As I mentioned, there are currently some elements of the lands where there is zoning in place. And to zone all the lands R228, which reflect, as you can see on the plan, other areas zoned in the Vista Ridge subdivision. There's site-specific provisions related to reduced lot frontages on interior lots because of the shape of the lots and the bulb and the minimum lot area. The non-developable areas will be rezoned from RD to environmental conservation. So the locations associated with the environmental conservation area have been reviewed in the field as part of the EIS. We have received some comments from the region on confirming those areas with regional staff, and that's something we're in process of coordinating with the region and with town staff, just so there's a clear understanding of the distinguished areas. A draft plan of subdivision application has been submitted to create the residential lot. So a portion that you can see that has frontage along Highland Park Drive was part of a registered plan. This draft approval is going over top of those lands and creating one new draft plan approval that will be registered on title of the land, subject to the appropriate final conditions being considered. Next slide. So this is the draft plan of subdivision. Again, this just provides some detail on the lotting fabric, identification of the turn circle, and the conservation areas. You can see the environmental conservation area relates to natural areas and slopes. And so the EIS and slope studies have been completed and provided and are under review with comments being received through the process. Next slide. This plan just gives a general idea of how the lots would be configured with single detached homes on the properties and the location of the green space, and again, really showing building footprints and driveways in context of the lands. Next slide. Here are just some examples of the single detached dwellings and designs that will be considered. These are designs that Lausanne's looking at using for the lots. Again, a mix of types and use of colors and materials as part of the overall variety in the neighborhood. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, in our opinion, the proposal is supporting intensification targets. We're utilizing land that is within a designated area, can utilize existing services, and provides for intensification of such lands. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment conforms to the official plan, and the intent of the bylaw, intent and purpose of the bylaw is being maintained with the proposed bylaw, in the sense that single detached dwellings are being proposed, and those types of dwellings are compatible with other units and other adjacent land uses that are also zoned single detached. And the plan of subdivision addresses the requirements of Section 5124 of the Planning Act, which relates to specific criteria, for example, services being available, making sure that roads are conveyed, and just other design requirements and details associated with the development would be addressed through conditions of draft plan approval prior to any registration or final approval of the lands. So that's our presentation this evening, and be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Dave. Are there any clarifying questions to the delegate from committee? Councillor Vinchima.
Thank you, Chair Patrick, and thank you for the presentation. It's good to see that this is getting finalized and rounding up that whole area. My question is, you said there's a slope stability study and an EIS that was completed and it's being reviewed. So I guess is that being reviewed by staff, and were they both, did they identify any issues, or were they both supportive of the development as it's laid out?
Through the chair, yes, both were submitted to staff. Mr. Bruder could confirm, but the technical studies as we submitted them supported the proposal. And I know that they're under review, and any details coming out of the comments would either be addressed prior to staff recommendation or could be addressed as conditions of approval.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brunet.
Thank you, Chair Patrick. Through you to Mr. Aston. Thanks for the presentation. I'm just wondering, Dave, if you could clarify. I appreciate the draft plan of subdivision and the reference of block 12 and block 13 as being referred to as open space. But I did have the opportunity to sit in on one of the public meetings, and I did hear the question that was asked to you that evening with regards to any plans by Lausanne, by the developer, to dedicate some park space. So just for clarification, if you could give a definition on the draft plan in block 12 and 13, the definition of open space versus dedicated parkland.
Yeah, thanks. Through the chair, I don't know if the clerk could put the plan up just so that when I'm confirming, we're confirming with the plan in front of us, Councillor, if that's okay.
Absolutely, thank you.
No problem. Give me one moment. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, so blocks 12 and 13 as it relates to open space in the context of this proposal relates to lands that would be environmental conservation. So they will be added to adjacent environmental conservation lands and are not being dedicated as parkland dedication. There's no additional parkland dedication proposed with this proposal, in addition to what was already provided through the Vista Ridge plan of subdivision.
And that's great, Dave. And I appreciate that. And I asked the question only because of the comment that was raised at the public meeting. I don't want any misrepresentation here and someone coming away that open space was meant to be anything dedicated to park space. So I appreciate that clarification. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Brunet. Mayor Easton.
Very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to hear that clarification. I was also wondering about that. But Dave, thank you very much for your presentation this evening. And I'm looking for some clarification on the access then to the area that is going to be designated as EC. I didn't really see, it wasn't clear in the drawing whether people, whether the public would be able to go up there and walk through that narrow band of trees.
Through Mr. Chair to Mayor Easton, the intent is that those lands are consolidated with adjacent lands. Given the slope of that area, there's no plan to have residents access through that portion. The residential access to the trail would be further to the south on Highland Drive, where there's the trail planned along the rear of the lots and a connection, trail connection as Highland Drive is south and then turns to go north. So it's just to the south of these lands where there's a trail connection and no intention to connect with this block.
Okay, all right, I understand that now, yes. All right.
Mr. Bruder, do you want to go ahead? Do you want to jump in for a minute?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity. I just wanted to clarify too, the findings of the EIS, the environmental impact study, also identified that these particular areas shouldn't be utilized for recreational purposes, just in recognition that they are natural features, and the intent is to preserve them and minimize impacts from any type of activity. So I just wanted to make that clarifying point as well, further to comments from Mr. Aston. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, then I need a little bit more clarification. So these lands that are designated as EC will be divided up and be assigned to the existing lot configuration. Not all the lots, but some of them. Is that right?
Through Mr. Chair, the Mayor, the lands that will remain as EC, environmental conservation, would be dedicated or conveyed to the town. Mr. Bruder can confirm it's to the town or the conservation authority or the region. They will not remain as part of the development lots.
Okay, that's not entirely clear in this report. Okay, so that's great. And therefore, my final question really is in relationship to the trees and the concerns that were raised in the first iteration. As far as, you know, the potential for some of those trees to end up being cut down or, you know, creating some issues around slope stabilization. So what steps have you taken, Mr. Chairman, to ensure that there aren't going to be any problems during the development phase or after?
Through Mr. Chair, the EIS and the geotechnical studies have taken a look at the features in the slope and provided recommendation as it currently relates to the proposal. What we've been talking about with town staff is a further assessment and requirement, more detailed tree inventory plan and I guess tree planting plan as a condition of approval once we have a greater level of detail on the grading. So at this point, we have a general understanding, and then what we're talking with town staff about is a condition of approval once we have the greater detail. and we'll work with town staff on that to satisfy any additional comments with that detail.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. If Mr. Bruder's going to speak again, maybe he could also clarify whether the advice that we'll be getting on what trees to plant will be coming from the expertise that will be. That's it, my questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Mayor Easton. Go ahead, Mr. Bruder.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, that's correct, Your Worship. You know, as you're all aware now, we have our tree policy in place with the town, where we look at what the potential removals will be, and then we have to identify a tree replanting strategy, which, you know, that can usually come during the site plan process. The tree inventory comes a little earlier, but you're right. Usually the tree inventory is done by a certified arborist, and the requirements are they look at the health of the tree species, anything over 20 centimeters in diameter. They look at the health, they look at the size, and they look at the species to make sure that we're being comprehensive and fulsome when we look at the replanting plan. So the same would apply in this situation, further to what Mr. Aston was saying.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Bruder. Councillor Michalak.
Thank you very much, Chair Patriva, through you to Mr. Aston. Just and perhaps to Mr. Bruder as well, like with regards to the open space behind lots 11, 10, 9, and say, well, basically all of them, is there going to be anything on title where like landowners don't start encroaching onto that open space and start assuming that that land is theirs by maintaining, cutting the grass, taking, you know, basically giving the perception that they actually own more land than they truly do.
Mr. Bruder. Oh, sorry, Dave. I saw Matt's hand up. So
thank you, Chair. I'm fine to have Mr. Bruder answer as well, and we can work with town staff on that. But maybe there's a standard approach, and Mr. Bruder can address it.
Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just think that's another one of the mitigation recommendations coming out of the environmental impact study. When they looked at, you know, the geotechnical report that's being updated, that's really to confirm what the top of the slope is behind a lot of those lots. There's going to be a setback requirement from them, but more importantly, there's also a recommendation within the environmental impact study for fencing for the rear yards of those properties, just to avoid that exact situation whereby, you know, there's clippings or things being dumped over the side or things like that. So that's really the idea, is to delineate the back of the lots for that exact reason. So that is a mitigation recommendation in the EIS.
Okay, thank you very much. I just worry about people taking advantage of that land like it's their own and building a fence or building a shed or, you know, storing their old lawnmowers there and that sort of thing. That's all. Thank you.
thank you, Councillor Michalak. So there being no further delegations for this item, I now declare the public meeting to address the draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment by MHBC planning adjourned. I have a motion moved by Councillor Brunet. The council receive and file as information the following delegation regarding item 5.1 draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment by MHBC planning and Dave Aston. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call it the vote.
Thank you, Chair. And Councillor Michalak?
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
Mayor Easton?
Support.
Councillor Brunet?
Yes.
Councillor Russell?
Yes.
Councillor Rajima?
Yes.
Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. That carries.
Thank you, Devan. So we will now move directly into report PD 08-22 regarding the draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment by MHBC planning. Are there any further questions from committee? There being no further questions, I have a motion moved by Councillor Brunet. Council receive and file report PD 08-22 regarding the draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment applications by MHBC planning on behalf of 2410002 Ontario Inc. PLSUB 2022-0008 and PLZBA 2022007, and that a recommendation report be prepared once all comments have been received and any identified issues have been addressed. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call it the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Bernay,
Yes.
Councillor Micklick,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
Mayor Easton,
Support.
Chair.
And yes,
Thank you. That carries.
thank you, Devan. Our second public meeting is for the purpose of the update to the development charges bylaw and interest rate policy AD 05-22. Prior to proceeding with introductory comments from the Director of Special Projects and presentation from Gary Scanlon, Watson and Associates, I will ask the council proceed with the majority vote to extend the speaking time. I have the motion moved by Councillor and Deputy Mayor Mikulak. The council extends the presentation time until completed. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm okay with the show of hands from council members to extend that presentation time. Thank you. That carries.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much. Kathleen, would you like to proceed with some opening remarks to Mr. Scanlon and Mr. Tan's report?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as you mentioned in the preamble, we are undertaking an amendment to our 2018 Development Charges Background Report and also the 2018 Development Charges Bylaw. As part of it, the town is also proposing an interest rate policy. The reasoning for that is recent changes to the Development Charges Act does allow for some classes of development to be paid in installments. And as part of paying in installments, the municipality is permitted to charge an interest on that. And it's important to have an interest rate policy for that purpose. This is really just an interim update to address the changes in the provincial legislation. Our development charges bylaw does expire in 2023. So there will be a much more detailed update, which will result in a complete new background report and bylaw in 2023. So as mentioned, this evening we have a presentation from Gary Scanlon from Watson and Associates. So they will be providing an overview of changes to the Development Charges Act and the required changes to our background study, and also the Development Charges Bylaw, including the outline of the process to date. Just for everybody's information, Watson and Associates did complete our 2018 Development Charges Background Report and Bylaw, as well as they do a lot of development charge studies for other municipalities. So I would like to turn it over to Mr. Scanlon to take us through the presentation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dale. I'll now ask Mr. Scanlon from Watson and Associates to proceed with his presentation for this evening.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to be before council once again, council and staff. Thank you for extending the time, but I'll try and move through the presentation as quickly as possible. So as with any other public meeting, as we experienced with the prior process, opening remarks which Ms. Dale provided, and then we'll overview the policies and the changes to the charges, and then it's open for council's consideration and anybody from the public. We will conclude the meeting and nothing will be decided with respect to the development charge proposals. There is a public process, and the public meeting that we have this evening is part of that process, and we must go through a minimum 60-day circulation period, which will end in May. So at this particular point, it's just to receive any comments from the public. Next slide. This just summarizes the process we've been proceeding through. We commenced with staff in the latter part of 2021. We have engaged with senior management team, and we had a council workshop just into early January. So tonight we'll have the public meeting, and we'll look to have council consider the bylaw on May the 2nd. When I talked about the 60-day period, we released the background study March 1st. And obviously the 60-day period would conclude at the beginning of May. So we're meeting the requirements of the Act. Next slide, please. Development charges have been gone through a number of different adjustments over time. Most recently, there was 4 different bills. Bill 108, if you recall, that was the one introduced by Minister Clark, which actually proposed changes to 16 different pieces of legislation, and the development charges was one of it. A lot of those changes were not dealt with through Bill 108, and they were subsequently dealt with in Bill 197, but there still were some adjustments that were included, and I'll quickly highlight those changes. At the end of the day, what the proposal in our background report that we've provided, what is incorporating is historically the softer services, parks, recreation, library, and some planning studies had this mandatory 10% deduction. That's been removed, so we've removed it from the calculation. And then there was some update of capital costs on select projects in the Parks and Rec area, as well as the water services. Next slide. Development charges, just for everybody's information, members of the public that may be watching, what development charges are is a special piece of legislation. It allows the municipality to impose charges on all different forms of development. So that includes residential as well as commercial, industrial, institutional. And those monies help to construct new infrastructure to support the development. So these costs are the cost to support the development. We incorporate into our calculations, and then we represent it for both residential and non-residential. It is noted that developers still have certain cost responsibilities, that being within, say, their plan of subdivision, the internal roads, water mains, sewers, street lights, sidewalks. Those internal costs are 100% the responsibility of the developer. What the Development Charges Act does is give us the broader infrastructure outside of those subdivisions. Next slide. Here we are. So there's the 4 different pieces of legislation. I'm going to refer to them as the Bill 108 or Bill 138. There's just too many words within each of the titles to recite. But these are 4 pieces of legislation which will affect the calculations we've done. And Bill 108, basically, at the end of the day, provided for changes in the timing of payment for, let's say, rental housing, institutional development, and nonprofit. So rental housing or institutional, they would pay upon occupancy, but their payments will then be spread out over 5 years. So 1/6 of the payment would be made as of the day of occupancy, and then on the anniversary in the next 5 years, they'll pay the rest. So the province is looking to provide some cash flow benefit to the rental housing and institutional developments. Nonprofit housing, similar to that, upon occupancy, they get to pay over 20 years. As well, if there is a site plan application or a application for a zoning bylaw amendment, the day that the municipality receives a full application, the development charges in effect at that date are frozen, and they're frozen until 2 years after council approve the site plan or the zoning bylaw amendment. You then have 2 years in order to complete or to initiate the development. And if you do, then the charges are frozen as of that date. Now, I'll just mention any of those items I just talked about are subject to having interest charges for each of the payments. And that's what Ms. Dale was speaking about, is that there's an interest rate policy. And that allow for, obviously, if you're spreading payments out for, let's say, nonprofit housing over 20 years, the municipality is losing the use of those funds, the delayed funds, so you can at least apply interest. So you're getting a return on, so to speak, the loan that you're giving to the municipalities. Bill 138, quickly, actually, with what was identified there, the rental housing, institutional, and nonprofit. Initially, they wanted to do the same thing, extend payment timing for commercial and industrial, but Bill 138 rescinded that. Most of the changes were introduced in Bill 197, and they reduced the number of eligible services that we can collect for. I'll show you that in a moment. And but on a positive side for the municipalities' financials, they removed that mandatory 10% deduction. And they also removed a mandatory 10-year planning horizon for more of the softer services. So we haven't modified anything with respect to the 10-year planning horizon, but we have removed the 10% mandatory reduction. And then the Bill 213 just basically introduces an added exemption, and that's exemptions for university properties, as long as the university is receiving grants from senior levels of government. Next slide. As you can see, this is the listing of eligible services now. They've trimmed it down from what we had before. What's highlighted in red are the services that the town provides, and those are the ones that are incorporated within the background study. I would note, and you'll see this shortly, that as well in the current bylaw for the town, there is municipal parking, but you can see from this list that that's been eliminated. So the municipality can continue to collect that up until September 18th of this year, and then you can no longer collect for that service. So there'll be a continuance up until that point, and then, as I say, as of September 18th, it becomes an ineligible service. Next slide. So we talked about the 10% reduction, that removing that 10% deduction, and that would be in your parks and recreation services. We also renamed this under the current bylaws called indoor and outdoor recreation, but we're using the proper terms, as you can see on the prior slide, that they're now calling it parks and recreation services. So we've changed the name. Parking services, you can see, will continue, but the 10% deduction has been removed, but this will only continue until mid-September. Library services and some of the studies have had that the 10% removed from the calculations. So that would provide for an upward movement in the charges that we calculate. Next slide. Once again, the administration category we've adjusted, and it's now going to be called a class of service. It's a bit of a weird thing that the province did, but you can see that studies such as some of the planning studies, planning hasn't been identified as a eligible service. But some of the planning studies, such as an official plan update or amendment, would be dealing with policies with respect to water, wastewater, roads, parks, recreation. So it's still eligible, but we have to now call it a class of service rather than an individual service. It's a minor thing. Just point out that the Act has made some changes which basically require ourselves as the consultants to slightly modify the way that we do the calculations and prepare the bylaw. Next slide. We've also made some capital project adjustments to the costing. And for Parks and Recreation, this was an adjustment to the noted park. With respect to water services, you can see that there's 3 or 4 projects that we have updated costing on, and we've made the adjustments as per staff's recommendation. And then I've noted with respect to the studies, there's been some adjustments. Some have removed the 10% deduction, and then we've had to remove a couple of the studies because they're no longer eligible. Next slide. Still waiting on my screen. Coming slowly. Okay. There we go. I can see it now. So the bylaw revisions really are focused into several different components. If you recall, when I talked about Bill 108, there's a change in the timing of payments for rental housing, institutional, and nonprofit. So we've adjusted now to recognize the changes in the legislation. We've also put into place the DC freeze, which applies to site plan and zoning. The third major bullet, we've identified that these delayed payments will be subject to interest rates being charged to them. We've provided for mandatory exemptions so that they've provided additional dwelling units and ancillary units. They've made some modifications with respect to basically those. In essence, if you're building a new house or a new townhouse, let's say, you can add an additional apartment in any of those units and not have to pay for that additional apartment. Historically, with a brand new build, if there was 2 units associated with that building permit, you would have paid for the 2 different categories of units. You now, with respect to the additional unit or ancillary unit, you get to build that without having a development charge paid to the municipality. So it's a bit of a freebie, so to speak, in those particular instances to whoever's building. And then, as we've noted, there's been refinements in the definitions to incorporate the above items. Next slide. Now, the next couple of slides will deal with the quantum of the charges, so that from these calculations, there is actually an increase in the charge payable. This is your current structure, and this is in 2018 dollars. So one of the things, if you read the background study, we have updated costs as of today, but what we've had to do is deflate those costs back to 2018 because the bylaw was passed in 2018. So we have to put it back in historic dollars. And once council deals with the bylaw, then staff will inflate that back up to today's dollars. So it's a bit of a process we have to go through, but it's because of the timing difference in between when the bylaw was passed and when we're doing the adjustments. So right now, the structure is there are 6 services that are anywhere in the municipality. You will make a payment for these particular services. That's roads, parking, only until September 18th, fire, outdoor rec, indoor rec, library, and growth studies. Then within certain urban areas, such as Vineland and Prudhome's and Beamsville, you would pay for water, wastewater, and storm services. So you can see that's an extra $4,600. There's another area charge where you're only going to pay for storm drainage in Camden, and that's $12,900. So if you're in the rural area, you're in a single family home, you'd pay $17,990. If you're in Beamsville or one of the urban areas, you're paying an additional $4,600. And then if you're in Camden, you would pay an extra $12,900. You can see we have different sized units moving from singles and semis. The other multiples are medium densities. And then we have 3 sizes of apartment units. And then we have a charge for commercial, and a separate charge for industrial, and a separate charge for institutional. If we go to the next page, these are the updated calculations. And we've highlighted them in yellow just to focus where we've made the adjustments. And you can see we've kept the same structure, but we've updated the calculations in order to reflect the changes that I talked about earlier in the presentation. If we go to the next page, you'll be able to see the comparison a little bit better. If we can go to one more page. I'd note while this is happening, because of the indexing, which there's an index, a special index, a construction cost index by StatsCan, which tracks tender price changes. And in between 2018 and 2022, there's been a 24% adjustment in the cost of the tenders. So any of the costs I'll present right now, like this particular one, if council passes the new bylaw, these charges will be increased by 24% to reflect today's dollars. You can see here that on the municipal wide calculations, the charge has moved from just under 18,000 to about 18,600. So roughly a $600 increase for those components, and then roughly about a $400 increase due specifically to the water services. If you note municipal parking, which is the second from the top, that $88 charge, that will drop off, as I say, as of September 18th. So if you're in the urban area, the charges are the 18,580, and that'll be indexed. If you're in the urban service areas, there'll be an extra $5,000 for the stormwater, the wastewater, and the water charge. And then if you're in Camden, there'll be $12,900 solely for the stormwater drainage. Next slide, please. A similar comparison with respect to commercial charges, industrial and institutional. So you can see, for example, commercial will be increasing roughly by, if you look at the grand total, municipal and urban, it's roughly about 30 cents in total. So non-residential is represented on a cost per square foot. So it's the building size times these charges. The industrials increased by about 15 cents, and then the institutionals increased by about 25 cents per square foot. Next slide. In the last couple of slides, we'll just provide some comparative information. The charges, these are the charges which are in the county, within the region right now, region of Niagara. The orange charge is the charge imposed by the region, and the dark blue charges are those imposed by the towns and the cities. You can see currently, especially for Camden, it's at the top of the list with the charges in the urban service area following behind. And then you can see places like Pelham and Thorold following slightly behind. So the charges are at the region and the local level, roughly about $60,000 in Camden, a little over $50,000 within the urban serviced area. And you can see a lot of the other municipalities are running at about $42,000, $43,000. Next slide. Next slide will show you the commercial. And you can see a similar type of adjustment there. And if we move to the next one, you can see a similar type of charge for the industrial. And I'd note that these charges right now have the indexing. So this is with the extra 24% that we talked about. And you can see on the industrial, these are at the lower end for most municipalities. The region imposes the charge. There are places like Niagara Falls and Fort Erie and Welland and Port Colborne who don't impose an industrial charge currently. Next slide. So to conclude, that's the conclusion of my presentation. As noted, we'll be back before council on May 2nd. And with the proposed bylaw, obviously any changes that are suggested, either arising from the public meeting or subsequent to this, will be discussed with council at that particular meeting. I'll hand it back to, unless Ms. Dale has any concluding remarks, I'm happy to hand it back to the chair for your guidance.
Mr. Chair, I don't have any additional comments.
Okay, thank you very much, Kathleen. Thank you very much, Gary and Byron. Are there any questions from committee? Councillor Renchema.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's not a question, just I wanted to note just a small error because there's been a change, I think, since our original development charges bylaw, but on page 27 of report AD 0522, Serena Park, there's a park referred to as Serena Park, but it's actually called Rotary Park now. So just so it doesn't make its way into the final bylaw.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Renchema. Councillor McCulloch.
Thank you, Chair Patriva, through you to Gary Scanlon. I'm just curious, thank you for coming tonight. And, you know, it's detailed, a lot of numbers, a lot of information, and it's plenty to digest. In terms of the DC interest rates, the rate is frozen at time of submission for up to 2 years with the rate being prime +2. How do we come up with that number? Because in doing the research that I'm looking at other municipalities, like it's anywhere from 2 plus prime, 3 plus bank rate, 5, 5.5. I'm seeing numbers all over the place in terms of the interest rate charged. And I'm asking this because I'm wondering or worried that we may be being used possibly as a bank offering cheap money.
Through the chair, good observation. The rates do extend up to, the highest is actually 10.5%. One municipality has imposed a charge up to 10.5%. At the interest rate that's chosen is at the pleasure of the municipality. Generally is to reflect that, what your cost of borrowing or carrying cost would be. But past that, it's a mandatory, these delayed payments are mandatory by the government. These are things that the Ontario government feels in its best interest to spur on affordable housing, or, to remove any perceived roadblocks that they think. But they did give you an opportunity to impose a charge at an interest rate that you feel appropriate. So it's mandatory, but the interest rate is something that you do have an opportunity to approve at your discretion.
Thanks, Gary. I see our Director of Finance and Innovation has jumped in, Lawrence.
To you, Chair Patriva, to Councillor McCulloch. Yeah, I did do a jurisdictional scan. I looked at Brantford, Guelph, Hamilton, Kingston, Whitby, Waterloo. There's a variety of different approaches. Some use the bank rates plus 2%, 1%, 3%. Some use a flat rate. I've seen 2 examples of 5%. I'm comfortable with being in the middle of the road on this one. Obviously, we're not the lowest in the proposal that's being put before to council, and obviously it's subject to council's feedback. I do think having it tied to the Bank of Canada rates with the regular increases that we expect to see, plus 2%, will generate more returns than it saying having us put money into a GIC, which is very low interest rates or returns. So I kind of looked at both and weighed both spectrums, and I think we have to be careful in how much we do charge, because we also don't want to stifle, because we already charge a significant amount for DCs. To actually add on or exacerbate with higher interest rates may actually do counter what we want. We got to kind of find that balance, and this is subject to a bylaw approval, provided taking in council feedback, And we can always make adjustments at a future date if we find that the interest rate charges aren't sufficient. Ideally, the timing for the DC funds being needed, the timing of the monies received is tied to the project. So if we do it right, we shouldn't have that much of a gap, at least as far as I suspect.
Appreciate those answers. I just, I'm concerned because like there's a 0% charge on affordable housing and institutional use in terms of interest rate charge. So that would have to be offset in some way. And I just, because it's so, I think this is relatively new, and I just want to make sure that we're not in a position of scrambling because somebody has taken out 2,000 DC permits at once and locked it in at that rate for 2 years. That's the concern I have in terms of finance down the road. And you know, did we make a mistake? So I want to make sure that we're on top of that sort of thing.
Mr. Wagner.
Your Chair Patrick, the council make like totally. Councilor, again, great points or great suggestions. I think like the payment plan is applicable to nonprofits or for residential units. So I think it's appropriate with that level. You're talking about the freeze. We have to see what volume's coming in. We have to see what cash outlays are going out for DC funded projects to see if there is some kind of gap. We have to keep eyes on the interest rates itself. Having a variable tied to the Bank of Canada rate, I think is better than a flat rate, as I said earlier. So if we find that we see, you know, that boatload of people trying to use this as a bank per se, we can make an adjustment because we can come back to council and ask for an increase to the interest rate bylaw for anything coming through. But we have to test it out and see where it is. And I do think being in the middle of the road is both being not overly zealous, but not being not responsible to our taxpayers to at least collect some interest and such. But we'll keep an eye on it. We'll make sure we monitor it. And if we need to make adjustments, we will definitely come back to council to make those and seek council's approval.
Thank you very much. Just one more question, if I may, Councillor Patrick, or Chair Patrick. To Gary Scanlon, why would a municipality charge 5.5% or 10.5%, as you've mentioned? In your experience, why would, based on Mr. Director Wagner's answer, in terms of, well, it's money in the bank and we wouldn't get that sort of interest you know, any other way, why would a municipality consider charging 10.5%, as you mentioned earlier?
I'm not going to stand in the shoes of that particular municipality and say why they would charge 10.5%. I know with some of the municipalities that are charging in the 5.5 range, they've gone through to take a look at their cost of borrowing, debenturing or whatever, in order to cash flow the works. Plus, they've added on top the cost of debenture issues and you know, construction timing, et cetera. So some of them have gone through a detailed step by step in identifying potential costs and such. So places like Peel region and York region, I know are the ones that are in the two, for example, that are in the 5.5 range, and I know they've gone through that type of approach. The 10.5, I can't comment on that one. I'm not quite sure how that was derived.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Mikula. Councillor Brunet.
Thank you, Chair. Just a clarification question with regards to the Appendix A of the report. I believe it's page 32. Where we're talking about water services. And it goes on to say that through this DC update, staff have identified a number of costing changes. So I get it. And when I look at that through you, Chair, and I don't know if this is for Mr. Scanlon or for staff, but you know, when we look at the Hickson Street pumping station upgrade, you know, that's a project that's been completed, Cherry Heights. I guess when I'm looking at the Prudham's water main construction upgrade, and it says project costs have been updated to $10,475,000. To the best of my knowledge, this tender hasn't gone out for tender yet. It still is to be dealt with. So I'm just curious as to where this number is coming from. If it is indeed an update.
So that, go
Mute
ahead.
Chair.
Sorry, Gary, go ahead. And then Ms. Dale, you can jump in.
I'll let Ms. Dale answer.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So typically, when we're updating some of our costing and things like that, we did get the figure from our Public Works Department, and it's based on the engineering consultants that they've worked with. We do have the opportunity. So the idea is to start, collecting some of the funds through development that's going to occur before we do the major update for next year. So there is the opportunity to adjust that figure further for prud'homs when we do the fulsome 2023 development charges study.
Okay, so through you, Chair, for clarification, we've recently gone through a process in the Jordan Village where we had a tender come in grossly over anticipated. So are we saying that at the time we go to tender, if this number that were to come in 5 million over this number, that we're on the phone to Mr. Scanlon the next morning?
Through the chair, we'd appreciate a call like that, but you're right. I mean, it moves from being an estimate to actual costs. And if the costs actually are significantly higher, then it would only take, let's say, 3 months in order to implement the change in the costing. Obviously, the tender would be awarded. You've got the construction, maybe a year type of thing. So we would have the development charge adjusted well in advance of completion of the project. But, we go with the best estimates at the time, and then we correct for actuals.
Thanks, Gary. Mr. Wagner.
Councillor Brunet, it would be similar to what we have as a later presentation on Red Maple. We're fully expecting to recoup additional DC funding when we do our fulsome review in 2023. So we built it into the proposal because that will come when we do the full update going forward. And it would be similar to prud'homs as well. We come in with an estimate. When we get closer to it, we do the update, and then we seek to be compensated for the DC funds that are owed on the project. So very similar to Red Maple, as you'll see later in tonight's discussion.
Councilor Brunet, you good?
I'll run with it. Disappointed, but I'm not going to make an issue of it.
Okay, Mr. Kirkopoulos.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I could. So I think the Councillor Brunet raises a good point, and something that I think Directors Wagner, Dale, and Graham and I will chat about, not getting too in the weeds, but the Prud'hom's water main project and the Victoria Avenue crossing piece of it, two projects that we bundled. So I think what you've got is 10 million plus the additional cost for the Victoria portion. But nonetheless, I think the councillor's right. I think, there was a meeting as recently as this past week. And so I think it's important that we bring an update to council, to committee of the whole soon, which we are. But I suspect we'll be providing a quick update to Mr. Scanlon as well. So I appreciate Councillor Brunet bringing that up, and I think it's a good point.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Mr. Scanlon, for the presentation, and Byron for your due diligence on the background. And you know what? And just from a social aspect, I mean, to our members of our housing committee, wouldn't it be a panacea if we got 2,000 applications for nonprofit and rental housing? You know what? This is a first step. And, from Mr. Scanlon and from Mr. Wagner, the adjustments can be made. So there's no registered delegations for this item this evening. Having heard all the comments, the public meeting is now closed. Council urges the public to submit their comments in writing prior to April 4th, 2022 so that they can be included in the staff recommendation report, which is scheduled to be considered by committee on April 25th, 2022. Council consideration of the development charges bylaw is scheduled to occur on May 2nd, 2022. We will move directly into report AD 05-22 regarding the update to the development charges bylaw and interest rate policy by the town of Lincoln. Are there any additional questions from council to staff? There being no further questions, I have a motion moved by Councillor Timmers. The council receive and file for information the presentation by Gary Scanlon, Watson and Associates regarding the update to the development charges bylaw and interest rate policy by the town of Lincoln. And that council receive report AD 05-22 regarding the amendments to the 2018 development charges background report, the 2018 development charges bylaw number 218, and the draft interest rate policy. And that a recommendation report be prepared once all comments have been received and any identified issues have been addressed. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Mickley,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Brunei,
Yes.
Mayor Easton,
Support.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
Chair.
Yes.
Thank you. That carries.
Thank you very much, Devan. We have now concluded the statutory public meeting section of tonight's agenda and will now continue into our consent agenda. So we are now considering item 6, the consent agenda, inclusive of item 6.1, age-friendly advisory committee minutes of January 6, 2022. Item 6.2, the active transportation advisory committee minutes of January 27, 2022. Item 6.3, housing and homelessness community partnership advisory committee minutes of February 8th, 2022. Item 6.4, municipal heritage advisory committee minutes of February 10th, 2022. Item 6.5, active transportation advisory committee minutes of February 24th, 2022. And item 6.6, the museum accession report CS 02-22. Would any member of council like to remove an item from the consent agenda to discuss? Okay. There being no further discussion, we have a motion. Okay. Okay, I'm just
Page 14, Chair.
Thank you. I was just flipping, Deputy Clerk. Thank you. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Rajima that all items listed under the heading of consent agenda for Monday, March 28th, 2022 be adopted as recommended. Item 6.1, age-friendly advisory committee minutes of January 6, 2022. Item 6.2, active transportation advisory committee minutes of January 27th, 2022. Item 6.3, housing and homelessness community partnership advisory committee minutes of February 8th, 2022. Item 6.4, municipal heritage advisory committee minutes of February 10th, 2022. Item 6.5, active transportation advisory committee minutes of February 24th, 2022. And item 6.6, the museum accession report CS 02-22. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Mayor Easton,
Support. Thank you.
thank you. Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Mickley,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Brunei,
Yes.
Chair.
Yes.
Thank you. That carries.
Thank you very much, Devan. So item number 7, Community Services and Infrastructure Committee agenda. So we're at this portion of our agenda. There are no registered delegations this evening for Community Services and Infrastructure Committee. Report 7.2, we will now consider item 7.2.1, the Museum and Cultural Center 2021 Annual Report, CS 04-22, a very action-packed item. Lots going on at the museum, the moving into the new facility, tremendous growth in respect to fundraising and people coming out and doing events and things like that. So do any members of council have any questions? Okay. Oh, Mayor Easton.
Mr. Chairman, such a big report, you know, it's a shame not to make any comments.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
This amount of effort that goes on. I have a couple of questions. Just a comment regarding the medical equipment or really anything that has utility. If it's possible to locate expertise to identify the actual use of these tools, I think it would make it much more interesting. I looked at a lot of those instruments and I've certainly used them a lot myself. And I think their uses are quite interesting. I'd like to see more detail on that. No, it doesn't have to come back. I just mean for the future. And then the other thing that I did speak with Jessica about this last week, and it's really only to get it on the record that the ephemera or these paper items, all these wonderful postcards and photographs, etc. We have a number of organizations within that framework of heritage. It includes the Friends of Lincoln's History Archives. It includes a museum. It includes work that's similar work done by the library. And my question really is whether or not we can begin to move toward a more common policy around who is going to take charge of all of these items. And I say this only for the benefit of members of the public who we want people to know where to direct their items and not throw them out. So I don't need any information about that. I just wanted to put that on the table as additional information for the great report that came forward tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Timmers.
Thank you very much, Chair Patriva. I certainly didn't want this report to just pass through without any comment because it's just a fantastic report. I actually really enjoyed reading this report and I just love the way it's presented. I also had questions as the mayor about items that are deconcessioned and accessioned and where do they go and do we have a policy, and maybe through to Ms. Wilson, if you have any comment regarding that. What if we have a policy, what do we do with those items? Because that was one of my questions as well.
Certainly, through you, Chair. We do have a collections management policy, and that is a requirement for the museum to have through the provincial government, who provides some of our funding. So when we de-accession an object, there is sort of a hierarchy of avenues we take to get rid of the object. The first being offering it to other institutions locally, whether it's Friends of Lincoln's History or other community groups, other museums that may have more relevant, the object may have more relevance to. And then if there's no interest in them taking the object, we can either offer it for sale through a public auction, and then the money generated through that public auction would come back into the museum's collections budget. There's no possibility that money could be used for operations per the code of ethics that we subscribe to. And then finally, if the object's beyond repair or it's so badly damaged, we are entitled to throw it away.
Okay, thank you for that. I was wondering when I was looking at all the items, what would happen with those items. I think this past year has just been incredible with the move to the new museum and the work that has gone into it. And I read when I was reading the report, I saw the comment that you're a tiny team but mighty. And you certainly are. And I think you've just done a fantastic job. And to you and your staff and your team, you know, all of you should be commended. And I'm very, very excited when I was reading this report. It's very well done. Anyway, I don't have anything else further. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Timmers. And we you know, through the Museum Advisory Committee, we have got a committee that sits with staff on the accession and de-accession items. Do we not, Jessica? Yes. Right. So they go through that and very knowledgeable and more knowledgeable than we as council are. So we look to their expertise on that. So Councillor Minchima.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is about fundraising. When we were in there the other night together for the unveiling of the new displays, I took a picture of the wall, the fundraising wall, and I had a couple of people ask me how much it costs to buy one of those leaves on the wall, and I don't know. So can you tell me? There's large ones and small ones.
Yes, there is different levels. And Jessica, go ahead.
Certainly, through you, Chair. Yeah, there are different levels. So the minimum donation in order to get your name on the wall is $500. And then we have, and that would be the guide level. And then the interpreter level would be 5,000 to 25,000. The archivist level is 25,000 to 50,000. The curator level would be 50,000 to 100,000. And then any donation over 100,000 would be displayed on the trunk of the tree.
Okay.
So those levels correspond to the size of the leaves that we offer.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
And Councillor Rinchima, the fundraising committee actually worked with staff to come up with those funding levels. We didn't want the typical gold, bronze, silver, so we came up with something unique to the museum setting, and we're all very, very pleased with those categories. Councillor Mikulak.
Thank you very much, Chair Patrieva. Through you to museum staff. The museum's up and running, and I think it's fantastic. It's beautiful, well kept. You're doing a terrific job with the exhibits and all of that. I have a technical question. As something I've noticed personally in attending it from time to time is, how is parking? With regards to parking, where is staff parking? Where are visitors parking? Can you offer any like buses pulling in? Now that it's built and it's not on paper, what feedback, or have you been working with anyone with regards to parking and its management?
Certainly, through you, Chair. Parking generally is not an issue, you know, day to day when we're seeing visitors come in, you know, smaller groups and throughout the day, different times. However, I will admit that when we have large events, even the opening reception that we had last Friday, parking is an issue. We typically have asked people to park at the fire hall and walk over, but with the current construction going on in Jordan Village, that's not really an option. So really, we're looking forward to Jordan Village being complete. But in the interim, parking will continue to be somewhat of an issue.
Okay, I appreciate that response. I think my main concern is that parking in the evening time in particular is safe for people walking home, especially at night. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mikulak. So there being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Timmers to receive and file for information report CS 04-22 regarding the Museum and Cultural Center 2021 annual report. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to call it the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Russell?
Yes.
Councillor Brunei?
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor Easton?
Or
Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Councillor Mikulak?
Yes.
Councillor Rajima?
Yes.
Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. That carries.
Thank you very much, Devan. We will now consider item 7.2.2, Report CS 05-22 regarding the 2022 Grow, Prosper, Belong Community Fund allocations. Do members of committee have any questions? Councillor Timmers.
Thank you very much, Chair Patriva. Just comment around, the requests are growing annually, and the Grow, Prosper, Belong Fund was set at $18,000. When we look at the chart on page 3, we had a total of $48,734 in requests. All very deserving community groups that could really use these funds. So I'm just wondering, how do we move forward with this? I see below a little note about perhaps increasing this. It just seems, if the groups aren't aware that there's only this amount of money and they're going to an awful lot of effort, in their application and hopeful of getting some kind of funding, just wondering how we move forward with this.
Sarah, would you like to tackle that?
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Timmers. Thanks for the question. I know that Councillor Brunet had a similar question earlier today when we were discussing it. So to share the same information that I gave to that councillor, staff will be reviewing this year the operating budget, and any increases will be made through that process to council to this fund. One of the key things that the review committee has noted over the last several years is just the fact that groups seem to be unaware of the maximum amount allowable for this fund and what they can apply for. So a very simple administrative change that we'll be making next year is to note the maximum amount allowable for application. And currently in the community grants policy, no group is permitted to receive more than 25% of the total fund. So out of the $18,000, that'd be about $4,500. And oftentimes we're receiving applications that are double or triple the amount in ask. So we think that making that small clarification on the administrative side will certainly help to scope the projects that groups apply for within the confines of the grant policy. But we will be taking a deeper look at whether that amount needs to be increased in 2023.
Yeah, no, that's great, Sarah. Thank you for that. I noticed the asks are getting bigger and bigger. And perhaps if, like you said, if you had that piece so that they're aware of what is actually available, then it would change their application ask. But anyway, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Timmers. So there being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Michalak to receive for information report CS 05-22 regarding the 2022 Grow, Prosper, Belong Community Fund allocation and approve the disbursement of funds in their totality in the amount of $18,000 to the successful applicants as outlined in the report. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to call it the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
Mayor Easton? Councillor Michalak?
Yes.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Councillor Rajima?
Yes.
Councillor Russell?
Yes.
Councillor Brunet?
Yes.
And Chair.
Yes.
Thank you. That carries.
Thank you very much, Devan. We will now consider item 7.2.3. Report CS 06-22 regarding the 2022 Whipple Trust Fund allocation. Do members of committee have any questions? I see none. I have a motion moved by Councillor Reimer to receive for information report CS 06-22 regarding the 2022 Whipple Fund Trust allocation and approve the disbursement of $3,325 from the H.E. Whipple Excess Interest Trust Fund to the 4 successful applicants as outlined in this report. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to call it the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Rajima?
Yes.
Councillor Russell?
Yes.
Councillor Brunet?
Yes.
Councillor Michalak?
Yes.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
Mayor Easton? Thank you. And Chair?
Yes.
That carries.
Thank you, Devan. We will now consider item 7.2.4. Report PW 05-22 regarding the Red Maple Avenue Storm Sewer Construction Update. Do members of committee have any questions? Okay. I see none. I have a motion moved by Councillor Michalak to receive and file the Red Maple Avenue Storm Sewer Construction Update Report and approve additional funding as outlined in Table 3.0 of this report to allow the Red Maple Avenue Storm Sewer Construction Project to proceed as tendered. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Brunei,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Mayor Easton, Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Michalak,
Yes.
and Chair.
Yes.
Thank you. That carries.
Thank you, Devan. There being no additional reports to consider for the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee agenda, we've now concluded that part of tonight's agenda. We will now rotate and allow Councillor and Chair Adam Russell to assume the chair at this time for the General Business and Finance Committee agenda. And on behalf of the directors from Community Services and Infrastructure, thank you very much to our clerks department for allowing them to be first on the docket this evening.
Thank you, Chair Pachariva. We will now begin the General Business and Finance Committee agenda. There are no registered delegations this evening, for the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee or the General Business Committee agenda. We will now consider item 8.21 report FN 0222 regarding the 2021 Q4 preliminary financial report. I will now ask our Director of Finance and Administration and the Associate Director of Finance to proceed with the presentation. Lawrence?
Thank you, Councillor Russell. I'm delighted, and I know Terry's delighted to be here tonight. Tonight we're here, both Terry and I are happy to be here to present to you and continue to follow through with our commitment to provide council and our residents with timely information on the financial affairs of the municipality. As always, like ever, like all times, we'll take any feedback you have on the information provided. We'll consider any comments or suggestions on including additional levels of detail, any additional information you'd like to see. We want to provide you with the information you want, and we also want to be transparent, not only to council members, but the taxpayer as well. Tonight, council will be provided with a financial update for the year ended December 31st, 2021. Next slide, please. So the quarterly financial results and the year-end updates we provide give you a snapshot of the town's fiscal activity at a given point in time. Tonight, we will provide key details on the financial highlights for the 2021, cover key fiscal drivers, including both our savings and pressures seen during the year. Finally, we'll close the presentation by reviewing some of the regulated financial reports. Next slide, please. The council report provided to you tonight focuses on our year-end financial results as it relates to our approved budget and key financial drivers. It also provides you a year-over-year comparisons for both our revenue and expenditures incurred. Later in the presentation, we'll cover some of the fiscal pressures and savings seen over the year. As we mentioned in our earlier quarterly updates, the pressures we flagged or identified are manageable. Finally, we will provide a procurement update with information on the number and value of procurements that staff have worked on to date, including some of the large and innovative projects we've done this year. Next slide, please. So this slide includes our current actual year-to-date results, how we tracked over the year by percent and a comparison to prior year actual results. As you can see, the total revenues generated in 2021 exceeded our forecasted budget targets, though our overall actuals for 2021 are lower than 2020. The increases in revenue this year can be attributed largely to three items: greater water consumption usage, which has been trending higher during COVID as more people work from home and as a result consume more water; increased grant revenues. In 2021, as an example, we received an additional $458,000 from the province to help offset COVID-related expenses; and taxation other. This includes things like supplemental property tax billing for new and or updated homes. Overall, we're slightly behind our financial revenue on interest income, as our rates of returns are still relatively low. We would hope with the recent rate hikes from the central bank, the yield would improve, but these rate hikes will most likely lead to rates going up on long-term borrowing as well. Just want to caution you of that. Next slide, please. As you can see, we wanted to show you not only how we're performing year to date for each of the revenue category, but how we compare year over year for each revenue category. Based on our projection, and as mentioned on the previous slide, we expect to exceed our revenue forecast for 2021. When we take a closer look at the various revenue categories, water and wastewater charges are still trending higher than pre-COVID numbers in 2019. We expect the trend to continue. They'll start to recede as people return to the office or workplace. The monies and surpluses go back into supporting our water and wastewater infrastructure. User fees continue to be impacted by COVID, but we are hopeful we can return to pre-COVID numbers as restrictions are removed and we get back to some new kind of normal. Grants, as noted, we received additional monies from the province to offset COVID-related impacts in 2021. But you will note in 2020, the grants received were significantly higher. In 2020, we received approximately 1.2 million in COVID-related funding, as opposed to the 458 we received in 2021. Taxation other is the supplemental property tax bills. Lincoln has been seeing a lot of growth, and MPAC assesses the new build and upgraded builds. The town receives additional in-year taxes before they are added to the roll for next year. Financial revenue, as I mentioned, is going down due primarily to lower investment income. Next slide, please. Now, as we turn to the roll-up of the town expenditures, this slide includes our current actual year-to-date results, how we tracked over the year by percent, and a comparison once again to prior year actuals. You can see at the end of the fourth quarter, with 100% of the year complete, this town has spent 101.56% of the budget. Slightly over what our target was, but not bad. For most of the items, we are generally on track or below our approved expenditure budget, but we are slightly over on compensation and the financial expenditure lines. The additional revenue, as I mentioned earlier, we received this year will help address the additional expenses incurred. When looking at the expense categories, compensation actuals have increased slightly from prior years, and it's due to a variety of items which include cost of living or COLA increases, lower staff vacancies, so we had a stronger staff complement this calendar year, and a few voluntary retirements and organizational departures. Administrative savings were largely seen in training and mileage reductions, and these are offsetting pressures from increased legal fees or costs. Equipment, vehicles, and technology. Current savings are related to fleet costs being lower than budgeted. Utilities, with lower volume of programs and such, we saw a lower general reduction in the use and the seasonal consumption. Many of our regular programs and services were not provided due to COVID. Financial expenditures. These are tax adjustments and write-offs for uncollectible accounts. These costs will be offset by the higher than budgeted supplemental property tax revenue that was discussed earlier. Next slide, please. As you can see, our largest expense year over year is compensation. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, it was slightly higher than our forecasted budget for the reasons I covered. This year, we're doing a compensation review to get a better understanding of all the drivers, both internally and externally, for compensation. Coupled with this, we are currently in the process of reviewing the town's organization structure, position management practice, and budgeted allocation as it relates to compensation. You can see the other year-to-date performances on expenditures. Again, we've added prior year comparators and forecasted year-end results. All appear to be relatively similar or consistent year over year and are generally in line with our approved budget. Though we expect to be slightly over in some areas, total expenditures are expected to stay close to our approved budget. There are more detailed breakdowns of the revenues and expenses by departments at the end of the presentation. I won't be going over each one, but feel free to ask about them during the question period, and SMT is available to answer any questions or concerns you have. Next slide, please. So Year to date, we have seen an increase in our forecasted revenues. We are slightly over on our forecasted expenditures for the year. The additional revenue from additional funding from the province of $450K, supplemental property taxes of $160K, and saving in the utility spending of $170K will help offset the increased expenditures we've incurred for compensation, property tax adjustments, and legal fees. Now I'll turn over the rest of the presentation over to Terry to take you through the procurement update, our regulated reports, and the next steps in our financial process. Terry, over to you.
Thank you, Lawrence. So this slide shows that our procurement agent was busy over 2021. She supported 45 different procurements this year, and they included some very large projects such as the Rittenhouse Road reconstruction tender and the Jordan Village improvement reconstruction of Jordan Village. Lincoln continues to show leadership in shared services by participating in 7 joint procurements for a variety of items. The procurement team also continues to work with program staff to improve procurement documents and processes, ensuring they're current and aligned with best practices. The town has a number of reports that are required to be completed at various times throughout the year. The statement of council remuneration is required by the Municipal Act to provide an itemized statement of remuneration and expenses provided to or on behalf of council or local board members in relation to the services they perform as part of their role. The types of expenses include mileage, cell phone, community events, and training incurred by members acting in their roles as elected or appointed officials. 2020 did see a decrease to council and board member expenses, but in 2021, the expenses is back to being on par and in fact slightly lower than it was back in 2019. The town's investment policy, FN 2006-01, requires the treasurer to offer an opinion on whether the investments are consistent with the town's policies and procedures. And his opinion is that it does. So we did do some shifting of investments over the year in order to streamline the setup and the operation of our investments. The balance of investments is based on an assessment of the funds that are immediately required, and that although significant cash flow was required to pay for some of our large capital projects in 2021, once our debentures are issued in 2022, that'll allow us to reevaluate and likely reinvest in our investments. And the next regulated report, the Building Code Act specifies the minimum amount of information required, but council can always make requests to see other information if desired. In 2021, Bylaw 2021-96 was passed that set the target range for various reserve funds, including a target of 12 to 24 months of the operating budget expenses for the building department. So once we transfer the 2021 surplus over, the balance of the building permit fee reserve fund will be at almost 13 months of operating expenditures. So that's right within the range that we were looking to get. And those are all of the regulated reports that we brought forward. Going forward, the finance team continues to make our final adjusting entries. Today, we actually welcome John Hollier-Hook to the finance team as accountant, and his first goal will actually be to work with the auditor to finalize our 2021 financial statements and bring them back to council for approval in July 2022 before the summer recess. The copy of the slides that we provided to council say that we're going to bring our Q2 report back before summer recess, but looking at the meeting calendar, it's not going to work. The Q2 ends on June 30th, 2022. So we will be bringing it back though at the September 6th meeting, which is the first meeting back after summer recess. So as a quick recap of what you've heard this evening, the revenues and expenditures came in close to budget. They were both slightly over the approved budget due to COVID measures, grants, and supplemental taxes. But council can rest assured that the town's regulatory requirements have been satisfied. And with that, we would like to open the floor to any questions that council may have. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Troll, and thank you, Mr. Wagner. Do members of council have any questions? See Councillor Micklick. Councillor Micklick, please go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Russell, or Chair Russell, through you to Director Wagner and Terry. Thank you for this report. It's always interesting to see the numbers and the finance. I'm going to ask a question, probably an uncomfortable one, about compensation and that significant increase. And the timing of it is kind of coincidental to the sunshine list. So in looking at these numbers, which I'm sure people do, how are these numbers determined? Like, how is compensation determined? And do we have a policy with respect to compensation and how that's managed?
Thank you, Councillor Micklick. Director Wagner?
Through you, Chair Russell, to Councillor Micklick. We do actually have a compensation policy, and I'm going to speak out of turn because it's an HR policy per se, but we have a policy where people proceed through the step progression as they progress through their job. Obviously, there's a collective bargaining agreement that dictates the compensation adjustments for collective bargaining agents. On top of that, we have the annual increases, which are tied to the collective bargaining agreement, which is applicable also to council. But right now I think I mentioned it in the presentation, we're going through a full compensation review to look at whether our policies are adequate or reflective of the current situation, if they're reflective of the current marketplace. We're looking to see if the policy can be strengthened in regards to advancing through the different levels. We're implementing or looking at the org structure and making sure the compensation aligns to the org structure to make sure that we fully understand that. We're also looking at, in regards to that, we're looking at the policies and procedures in year, both in year and out of year. But you're looking at an anomalous situation in regards to compensation. As I mentioned, we had some organizational changes or adjustments in year in order to refresh or revamp the organization structure. We're coming off of some lingering effects from COVID and COVID related costs, which are captured in there. I do not anticipate that type of variance to continue based on those one-time events or the lingering effects from COVID going forward. And I know Mike probably wants to chime in as well.
Thank you, Director Wagner. Mr. CAO?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. So great question, councillor, in terms of, I think trying to provide clarity as to how the numbers are reached in the policies. I'll echo what Director Wagner said, and that is absolutely every organization must have policies that address compensation and a whole bunch of other criteria and policies that we have in place. I think Lawrence highlighted there's progression through those bands. We are also dealing with, what I would call some legacy policies that we've since cleaned up over the last number of years. And we continue to clean up as we find those policies and I think, try to update them in a way that's ideal and that takes into consideration a number of policies each year. COVID, and while people, I think, don't want us to continue to reference COVID has meant that a lot of the staff that I think you're referencing, councillor, are the ones that were putting in extensive hours, are the ones that weren't taking vacation. And so once again this year, as we finish what is really year 2 of COVID, there was payouts of vacations. There were things that couldn't be taken. We tried to encourage people to take as much time off as possible and to carry vacation over. But like we did last year, there were some cases where those individuals weren't able to do that, where we have 1 or 2 person departments. And so as a result, those were paid out. And so I think some of the discrepancies or some of the slight increases you see on a budget like ours can be explained that way. But again, I think as Director Wagner highlighted, these are things that we've experienced the last 2 years, but not things inevitably as we look at our policy and the compensation review that should be a year-over-year item.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. Councillor Mikulik?
I appreciate those answers. I just feel like, there's budgeting for, salaries and compensation. There's budgeting for potential, circumstances that come up, and it just seems like it's quite a bit off this year. It's a number that's definitely stands out, and and in doing that, and again, coincidentally, that sunshine list comes out, and everyone talks about it. That's interested in that sort of stuff, and everyone can look up. It's all in the open public to see, and there's some increases, there's some decreases. And I'm trying to understand how this is all working out. And I don't understand how there could be increases of this percent, decreases of that percent. And I get it. I understand some people didn't take vacation, but the amount of increases and decreases are all over the place. And I'm looking for some clarity in that without naming specific departments or specific areas in general. So,
okay, Councillor Mikulik, was that a specific question? It sounded like a general question.
If possible, would it be possible to schedule an in-camera session, like to discuss certain salaries, to discuss certain departments, that sort of thing, and how compensation is determined or calculated?
Thanks, Councillor Mikulik. I'm going to go to our deputy clerk for a little input on the availability of in-camera sessions, or if our CIO wants to make a comment.
Sure, through you, Chair. I will hand it over to the CAO to make his initial comments. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think, inevitably there needs to be rationale. And I think, both our deputy clerk and clerk will tell you there needs to be specific reasons to discuss specific issues. One of them is human resources, but I would just caution council about discussing particular individuals. However, if council wants to go in camera to discuss with me as your CAO, I think, compensation principles, compensation approaches, attraction, talent retention, and those items, then absolutely, I have no problem going in camera and having that type of conversation. Again, I think if council starts asking specific questions, I'm comfortable answering those. I think I would just caution the council asking the question that if we get in camera, I think we just need to make sure that we've got the right criteria and the right rationale to go in camera, not simply curiosity or who's getting paid what at what level. But the deputy clerk can confirm that that understanding is correct.
Through you, Chair, yes, CAO, you are absolutely correct. We would need a sound reason to go into a closed session, which that really doesn't pertain to your comments currently, Councillor. However, we can work with you to discuss this further and potentially book something in the future.
Okay, I'd appreciate that. And I can perhaps talk to other councillors and see what their thoughts are as well, if it's something of interest down the road. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Mikulik. Director Wagner, your hand is still up. Do you want to have a comment?
Through your Chair Russell. Yeah, I put it back up after the second comment of foray, where Councillor Mikulik mentioned about regards to the variances in the swings per se. I see a 4% change in the overall spending in the comp line. But let me talk to you about the comp, not necessarily the comp review, the org changes or the staffing changes of late, the reorganization and such. Before we looked at that, and some of the cost is related to that, before we looked at that, we looked at other savings or other potential offsetting costs as an organization structure to offset those increased costs. So we do consider that. And sometimes when you manage one line to the other, you do have to look across organization. So I think it would be remiss or not fully correct to just look at set individuals, but without understanding what we did and what we did this year over the past year to try to adjust for something. Yes, there are some anomalies. And I would suggest that when we come back to council with the compensation review, to talk about the policies, to talk about the framework, to talk about the approach going forward, I think it would be an opportune time to have that discussion with council about the framework and policy, because it does impact budget. It does impact our longer term range planning and our approach to staffing and staffing complement and attracting good talent as well. So I'm looking forward to that, and it's something that we discussed with the GBNF committee because we thought it was important to bring forward, and we know we had some questions from different council members on that regard. So I'm hopeful that will help answer or alleviate a lot of the questions or concerns you may have, Councillor Mikulak.
Okay, thanks, Director Wagner. Mayor Easton, please go ahead.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. To the CEO, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to have a little bit of information about where the town of Lincoln stands as we're compared to other municipalities. And also, I believe that we have had a review of salaries done, but I can't remember how long ago it was. So that would be my first question.
Okay, Mayor Easton, Mr. CAO.
Through Mr. Chairman, to the mayor's question, I'd say, over the last 5 years, there's been multiple reviews. We've never done a comprehensive review, but we've looked at where the municipality stands in terms of simply, within the grid across Niagara region, where we sit in terms of being able to attract employees. I think as Mr. Wagner answered in other questions, we always like to be in the middle. And I would say historically, that's where we've tried to position ourselves. Everything from where we sit in terms of percentile increases. We're in the 50th percentile. You're seeing a lot of municipalities move to the 60th and 65th percentile. So a lot of things that you're going to see in the compensation review in terms of where we sit, both within the region and outside the region. Now, in some positions, I think as council will know, as I've been in camera with you numerous times when we were looking at the organization last term, and some of the positions that we needed to solidify, there's always an ability to go slightly outside the range or to go at the top of the range in terms of attraction and retention. I think where we try and where we've typically been has been trying to stay within that range. But again, I think one of the things that you're going to see, or that I think a lot of municipalities see, is we're constantly reviewing these things. We're constantly looking at where we're at. And I think the review and the consultant that we've brought in will set policies that are fluid, that have a sliding scale, that increase with every change, whether it be inflation, whether it be cost of living, whether it be, I think, a number of variables that go into the decision. So we're constantly reviewing. We remain in the middle of the pack. And I know the CAOs across Niagara region continue to look at this.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. Madam Mayor?
Thank you very much for that. I also just want to check, Mr. Chairman, to ensure that our review will take a look at what our turnover has been like and what the potential cost is for turnover. I am aware of a number of positions that are coming available and the steps that municipalities are taking to retain their key players. So that's something else that we need to be aware of in terms of the competition that's out there. So the question is will we be considering that? And it can be the CAO or Mr. Wagner, whichever one.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. CAO or Director Wagner?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the mayor. This current review isn't taking into consideration I think, the particular part of the mayor's question, but I think we can work with human resources to provide some of that turnover data. I know Jacqueline provides that on a fairly regular basis internally to Director Wagner and I. I know I've seen it recently. So we can share that, I think, separate from the review that the consultant's doing, which very much is focused on compensation. And she has done most of the municipalities in Niagara region and a significant number of them in the Golden Horseshoe and beyond. It's a very specialized, I think, work and skill set. And so I think when you hear Marion and she presents to you, I think you'll get that third-party validation, which I know is important for members of council.
Okay, thank you, Mr. CAO.
Mr. Chairman, just as a comment, I have to say that the Sunshine List has about as much interest to me as how many cats people have in their houses. I just think it's really a shame to be spending so much time on something that's obviously very political. The people who know what kind of productivity is going on in our municipality are right here on the screen. And I think if there's any question in anybody's mind about whether or not there's enough productivity or whether we're getting return on our investment, we're the ones that are going to know. I certainly don't need to look at the sunshine list. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Councillor Pachariba.
Thank you, Chair Russell, and your worship, you stole a little bit of my thunder, but no, it's okay. And a question to Mr. Wagner. So I know that the Sunshine List came out in 1996, and going back to our discussion on DCs and how they go back to 2018, they're not indexed whatsoever. They don't reflect inflation. So I know this is kind of out of left field, but ballpark, if it was based on 2022 dollars, and I'm sorry for not sending this to you earlier, approximately what would that be? $160,000? Thereabouts?
Okay, Director Wagner, looks like you're did some math.
Through your Chair Russell, to Councillor Petrov, it should have actually been in the in an information we transmitted, but yeah, it would be over 160,000. So if you're doing it to today's dollars,
yeah,
the 100,000 is no longer relevant. It's still a significant number. Let's be honest about that. But it's, if you're trying to bring it back to 1996 to today's equivalent, it's nowhere close. And I believe if we were to do that kind of exercise, I think there would only be one person on the Sunshine List. So it would be a relatively small list.
Yeah, exactly. So, and again, by us falling into this narrative, it's our job as leaders to help to control the narrative, right? We've had 2 exemplary years with COVID. There's been people not taking holidays. There's been job movement. All of these factors need to be factored into it. And it's our job as councillors who know most of this, we go over it at the budget, to set the residents straight on when you get these questions. Don't get sucked into this negativity and this narrative that stuff is running amok, because it's not. And I, frankly, for one, don't appreciate this type of discussion.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Pachariba. That is definitely a lot less cats. I'm going to go to Councillor Rajema.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to further to this discussion, and it was something that I had on my mind when I saw that we were having a report come tonight about finances, and that's that in the last certainly few years and few years previous to that, we've had staff has had a lot of success in pulling in a lot of grant funding from upper levels of government and grants. And so we did at one point have a report that laid out exactly how much money has come into this municipality with successful funding applications. I'm wondering if we're going to see that again in the future, because that's a really important point that I think we have to keep top of mind.
Thank you, Councillor. I see our CAO had his hand up first. Mr. Kakopoulos.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll let Director Wagner, he looked keen to answer as well. I mean, my simple answer to the councillor is yes. I could give you an estimate right now, but I'll let Director Wagner go first. Then come back to me, Chair Russell.
Okay. Director Wagner.
Through your Chair Russell, the Councillor Regime, I'm happy to bring that back and include it in a year-end update. We have to, a large part of our tracking is based on cash flow coming in, which doesn't necessarily mean the grant awarded, because the timing of you receiving the funds don't necessarily align. But it's something myself and Terry have discussed internally to talk about the grants we've applied for and were successful in a given year, to have that number, and then talk to the monies, because what shows up in the grant line is simply the monies coming in. It doesn't necessarily mean the size of the award we receive. So it's something on our radar, and I'm happy to include that. As we said, take feedback and direction from council. We can probably include that in our year-end update next year. And I know in the ward meetings, I believe for Councillor Pachariba and Councillor Bernays, we provided some updated numbers for grant monies coming in. So happy to do that. Happy to include that as a good news story, because it is a revenue source and it does help us offset some of the taxpayer monies coming in, especially if we're getting funding from different levels of government or other sources.
Thank you, Director Wagner. To our CAO.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and I think it's a good question. It's a number that I know I've started sharing because a number of councillors have asked for it. Over the last 5 years, we've been able to bring upwards of $20 million in senior level government funding. I think Lawrence can get you the specific number as it relates to this past year. And we do have a few more announcements that are forthcoming and other significant asks in the hopper. So I think you could easily see that number increase. But I think when you look at the ability of our staff, this staff, to do that on behalf of council and the community, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, and I get every year we get this question, I get it. It's very much a topic on social media and otherwise, but we do have some of the best staff anywhere. I would absolutely suggest and put any one of our senior leaders against any leader anywhere in the Golden Horseshoe. We accomplish a lot. Our staff is top notch. And yes, I'm parochial in saying that. But, the fact that we've been able to, I think, go out there and get $20 million over the last 5 years, I'll let Lawrence and council do the math when every 200,000 or so is 1%, what that would mean.
Thank you. I know that, sorry, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to finish up. I know that for a while, it just seemed like there was just one funding announcement after another, and we're all very excited about that. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jim. I was going to come back to you to verify if you were good.
Okay.
Any other questions from council? Seeing none, I'm going to ask Mayor Easton if she would. My vice chair is not available tonight, so I'm going to ask if she can just jump into the chair very quickly so I can make a comment and ask a couple of quick questions to Director Wagner.
Sure.
Mayor Easton?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. First, a comment. Again, I think these conversations are very important. I don't think it's right that any councillor should have to set straight any one of our residents that has concerns over compensation or how their tax dollars are spent. There is a sensitivity to this out there. We have to be very, very cognizant of that and be as transparent and open as possible when we're having those discussions. So I think that first and foremost is always the way we should lead those conversations, and then again provide that feedback of where the dollars go, what that value for dollar is, and again to Councillor Patriva's point again about the indexing and how the $20 versus $22 or when the sunshine was the first originally initiated, again there is a vast difference. But that being said, just two questions. First to Director Wagner. As far as the report just mentioned that part of the compensation increase was because of some voluntary retirements and some legislative funding or dollars that were associated with that. I wonder if you can just provide a broad strokes explanation of what that entails, and is that something that we need to make sure we budget for as some of our current employees apex in their career timelines? Thoughts on that?
Mr. Wagner? I had to look for you. I didn't know where you went. Okay, go ahead, please.
Through you, Mary Easton, to Councillor Russell. Good question, because you're talking about demographic shifts. But if people voluntarily leave in regards to they retire of their own course without being incentivized, there's usually a gapping between. You never typically have overlap. So I would never build additional funding in a budget. So person A, manager A, leaves, retires, takes me a minimum 6 to 8 weeks. That's typically the process. So I usually have some gapping dollars, which creates some savings. Now, if it's a mission critical where I need to have overlap of funding because the person is going, I would hope that the department, looking at their aging structure, the demographics, assuming manager A is leaving, the manager has communicated to them that in 6 months they plan to retire. If they need to overlap, I would hope that they would include it in their budget. I wouldn't intend, nor would I want to build an excess into the budget because obviously it hits the taxpayer. I would suggest that when we build our budget, which is why we're doing a fulsome organizational review tied to compensation to make sure we understand all positions. We're having a position management control policy. We're looking at some better controls on that. So we will be able to manage that better without having to build contingency, which is not something I would do and not something I've ever done. In the province, we never did it. We funded up to your position. We knew which ones were vacant. We adjusted your budget down. That would be my ideal, to provide you just enough funds to operate, and where you have those mission critical, which are few and far between, maybe we add a little bit more budget so that there's no gapping in services or critical services required. I hope that answers your question.
Is that satisfactory, Chair Russell?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. One follow-up question in terms, and this is also to Director Wagner, in terms of the compensation review, or again, in my full-time job, it's called the JEP, Job Evaluation Project. When we get to those situations where we may be overpaying or the job is evaluated at a lesser salary, how are we going, again, it doesn't happen very often, but I know that there's always an expectation when we are below what the value is for us to increase. So what happens when we hit those levels where we are currently over indexed compared to what that value of that position is? How do we prescribe to handle that?
Through you, Chair Easton, to Councillor Russell. Having been a part of the JEP process that you're talking about at the province, in fact, having done it for several ministries, you're talking about red circle or gold circle. So typically what happens when, and again, we have to go through the comp review to see what actually shakes out and see where people sit in the spectrum, see whether they're within the range, because if they're still within the range, you're talking about anomalies where people are outside of the maximum range. And in past practices or outside of the town of Lincoln, typically what happens is you get red circled or gold circles, and that basically freezes your salary, and the best you're going to get at that point in time is maybe a cost of living adjustment, but no longer progressions through. I'm hopeful that we don't have examples of that, but in the case that we do, that would be obviously part of the comp review to show that this position based on the job descriptions, because we're going through a full job description rewrite as well, which will shift stuff, but depending on how well it's encapsulated, we may have one or two of those anomalies, and then those will be flagged and those will be shown in comparison to our comparators and showing where we pay in the range, and then we'd have to take the step from there. But that would all be divulged to council when it's completed. So that would be the typical process and what I would expect to come out of this as well. But again, I don't know what the final results are. We're going through the full job rewrites. I myself and Terry are rewriting 8 job specs to feed into this process. So hopefully it's a robust process and we get some answers for council.
Okay, thank you, Director Wagner. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm passing the chair back to you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Gemma to receive and file for information report FN 0222 regarding the 2021 Q4 preliminary financial report and approve the 2021 council remuneration report attached as Appendix B, and approve the 2021 investment report attached as Appendix C, and approve the 2021 building permit fee report attached as Appendix D. I will now ask Deputy Clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Pachariva?
Yes.
Mayor Easton?
Yes.
Councillor Bernay?
Yes.
Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
Councillor Rajima?
Yes.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Councillor Micklick?
Yes.
Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. That carries.
Okay, thank you, Devan. We will now consider item 8.22, restricted acts, in parentheses, lame duck delegation of authority provisions, LS-04-22. Do members of council have any questions? Seeing none, there being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Pachariva The council received and file is information report LS-04-22 restricted acts lame duck delegation of authority provisions, and that in accordance with the restricted acts provisions contained in section 275 of the Municipal Act 2001 SO 2001 C25 Municipal Act 2001, council passed a bylaw to delegate authority to the chief administrative officer and temporarily provide the corporation of the town of Lincoln with the ability to conduct certain business in the event that council is restricted in authority pursuant to these provisions for the 22 municipal election. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Mayor Easton?
Support.
Thank you. Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Councillor Mickwick?
Yes.
Councillor Rajima?
Yes.
Councillor Bernay?
Yes.
Councillor Patriva?
Yes.
Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. That carries.
Thank you, Deputy Clerk. There are no additional reports to consider for the General Business and Finance Committee agenda. We have now concluded the General Business and Finance Committee agenda. We will now rotate to allow Chair or Councillor and Chair Tony Bernay to assume the chair at this time for the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda. Chair Bernay.
Thank you, Chair Russell. We have now come to the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda. Agenda item 9.1, there are no registered delegations this evening for Planning and Economic Development. And we will move into reports 9.2, and we will now consider item 9.2.1, report AD-03-22 regarding the Economic Development and Tourism Year in Review. And I will now ask our Economic Development and Communications Director, Mr. Deaney, to provide comments.
Thank you, Chair Bernay, and good evening, Mayor Easton, members of council. So Economic Development and Tourism staff are pleased to be here this evening to present our year-end review and the introduction of our first ever annual business review. While you can imagine that most of our work in 2021 revolved around supporting our businesses and helping them emerge from the effects of the pandemic, staff were still able to deliver key elements of our economic development strategy. Thankfully, as you can see from the report before you this evening, Lincoln's local economy, represented in real GDP indicators, surpassed pre-pandemic levels in 2021 and are forecasted for strong growth right through to 2024. Lincoln experienced significant investment last year with several new businesses and expansions helping to support job creation in our community. We hit several milestones in 2021 to support economic development and tourism. To name just a few, enhanced communication to our business community through the launch of our e-newsletter to keep our stakeholders up to date on our activities, launched the Youth Skill Studio to support our local businesses and give youth both in Lincoln and throughout Niagara work-related learning to support their personal development through a $2.1 million grant. Executed on our tourism strategy and action plan to develop and launch our new destination brand, the Niagara Benchlands, to support tourism here in our community. And secured over $500,000 for direct support for our businesses to support costs related to the pandemic. New this year is the launch of our first annual business review, which highlights our key activities in 2021, but more importantly, highlights our business community and their successes throughout the year. So special thank you to Brittany and Cameron for their hard work and dedication throughout the year to help support our businesses. And all three of us are here this evening to answer any questions you may have, Chair. And thank you very much, and back over to you.
Thank you, Director Deaney, and thank you to both Cameron and Brittany for being on the call this evening and all your hard work. Do committee members have any questions? Councillor Timmers.
Thank you very much, Chair Bernay. Through to Paul Deaney and Brittany and Cameron, excellent work, fantastic report. I love this, the annual business review that you put together. And I'm just wondering where that will be shared. Is that something that would be available to the public? I think it's just fantastic information in there. And a hard copy would be really great to have as a reference.
Thank you, Councillor, and through you to the Councillor. So thank you very much and great comments. So the goal after this evening is to finalize the business review and actually print it out into a document format and distribute hard copies both to some of our businesses throughout the community, have some of them located at Town Hall. We're happy to distribute a few to council, but the goal is to really get them out far and wide.
Yeah, that's great. You know, you guys are doing excellent work, and it's really important that the public has access to this kind of information so they have an understanding of what's happening with our economic development and our tourism and supporting our local businesses. So great job. I really appreciate this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Timmers. Councillor Pachiriba, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Brene. And guys, excellent report. I mean, you know, going back to the start of the pandemic where we had the touch points with local businesses and asking them, you know, what they required from us, I think was a tremendous proactive approach, and you should all be proud of what's going on. I think we've really changed the narrative because, you know what, Mr. Kirkopoulos and his arrival, you know, if we heard it once, we heard it a bunch of times. And Councillor Brene can attest to this when he was fundraising for the Plumbing Center, that we weren't open for business, that we were hard to deal with, that there was a lot of red tape in place that stifled growth. So just want to get your thoughts on how, and I know that's changed, but how has the business community embraced this change? And how are we looked upon, you know, when you have your ECDEV meetings with other sections of the region?
Thank you, Councillor, for the question, and through the chair to you. So, I mean, great question. I mean, really, the goal of being open for business is having a voice here at Town Hall, and at the end of the day, is to support and create policies that help attract additional investment into our community. And while economic development and our tourism staff, our key role is to get out there and talk to our businesses, at the end of the day, it really takes a sort of multi-dimensional and across sort of dimensional role here at Town Hall from all staff, whether it be planning, finance, you know, legislative services, to respond to any questions that we may have to our community and our business community. So at the end of the day, it really is a key component to make sure that, you know, we are here when businesses call and we are responsive to some of their needs.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. I was going to go to Mayor Easton. I see Mr. Kirkopoulos with your hand up. Did you have something to add specifically to Mr. Danny's comments, or?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I did actually, and I think it, you know, a way maybe for me to answer Councillor Pachiriba's question, and that is, how do we compare, or what are we hearing from others? I can assure you that, you know, what I'm hearing from my CAO colleagues is on the tourism and economic development front. We're definitely a leader across the region, and I think I'm always asked to lend out the services of Mr. Deanne, Brittany, and Cameron on numerous occasions. They're busy enough here, but I can assure you, and that applies to Liliana, I think, as part of kind of a small but mighty team of comms and ECDEV, as recently as today, where she's helping Grimsby. So, you know, kudos to the team. Appreciate your comments, Councillor, but in terms of how we compare, definitely seen as a leader across the region. So thanks for the opportunity to say that, Chair Brene.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. Mayor Easton, please go ahead.
Thanks, very much, Mr. Chairman. I would like Mr. Deanne to look at it's my page 21, but it's the economic indicators where we look at the real GDP at basic prices. And if we could have some more explanation, and is the GDP the only, is that the only criteria that we would use to measure this particular item?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, for the question. So it is one key element that we are looking at, but truth be told, the 2021 census data, which is slowly coming out from Census Canada, will be some key elements that we look at and will be presenting to council as those indicators come out. So for example, job creation, job growth, key elements such as that. So we will be coming back as soon as the census data is released, but one element is the real GDP that we do look at. And as you can see from the report, you know, the pandemic 2020 was a considerable dip, but we've been able to exceed those numbers both in 2021 and forecasted in addition beyond.
Okay, but is it fair to say, for you, Mr. Chairman, that when we're looking at available jobs and the skilled workforce, that there's quite a gap in the availability of skilled workers. I'm not talking about specifically about the skilled trades. I'm just talking about, you know, anything outside of that where skills are required to fulfill a number of these jobs.
Good question, Madam Mayor, and definitely something that we hear a lot from our business community in terms of the availability of labor, both at the local level, but also the regional level as well. So one element in terms of why we tried to do the Youth Skills Studio is to help attract additional labor into our community, showcase that there are sort of jobs that we can help fill. In addition, I know both Cameron and I have been in constant conversation with our Employment Help Center on Ontario Street in Beamsville to help connect job seekers with employers. And we've put in a number of applications to support a few activities that we're looking to accomplish this year. But definitely access to skilled labor is a concern, in particular in our tourism hospitality sector. So that's why you've seen both Ms. Bazlewski and our tourism sector working hand in hand to try to fill the gap when it comes to the tourism sector. I think everyone knows that throughout the pandemic, there's been a little bit of an a lot of an exodus from the tourism hospitality sector. So we're trying to bring back more employment into that to help sustain additional tourism and economic growth. So skilled labor is always a concern, something that we're talking about.
So if you tie that, the economic indicator with the new businesses or expansions, I know that there have also been business losses. Should we be including those in this report through you, Mr. Chair?
So good question, Madam Mayor. And part of the reason why we're going to be coming back at a later date when some of the 2021 census data around jobs specific to our community is released. I think we're forecasting in the fall of this year is when Statistics Canada is set to release those numbers, but definitely something we're going to look at when it comes to job losses, job creation. And for the most part, we have had some business losses in our community, but thankfully we've seen other businesses fill those gaps and continue to hire people.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, just to quickly clarify then, under new businesses or expansions, can we assume that each one of those businesses had more jobs available as a result of whatever change it was that they made, whether they were new? I mean, that's an obvious one, but the expansions, did it always contribute to more jobs?
I say for the most part, Madam Mayor, I think the answer to that would be yes, but we are looking and working with these businesses to help identify what some of those new jobs would be. And again, once we have some of those statistic numbers from Stats Canada, we'll be able to dive a little bit deeper into the jobs we've seen in our community, both from a growth perspective, but also new businesses as well.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to ask a question. I just want to give, I just want to indicate to Mr. Deanne that it would be beneficial for all of us to speak to the Vineland Research and Vineland Growers on page 24. If you would do that, please.
Sorry, Madam Mayor, I apologize. I missed the question on that.
It wasn't a question. I just wanted to speak to those items because there's been so much that's being said about the progress that they're making, and I think it's going to have a big impact on us. Would you agree with that? I guess that's my question. Sorry.
So from my perspective, Madam Mayor, most definitely. I mean, I know Vineland Growers in itself is building a fantastic sort of distribution center in Vineland. I know it's really going to support our agricultural community and a lot of our family-owned farms. So from my perspective, and a lot of our small family-owned farms in Lincoln, definitely going to be a huge boost to our community.
So it's a campus issue really around Vineland Research that I'm interested in having you talk about.
Yeah, for sure. So I know in terms of Vineland Research, they've got a number of expansion opportunities on the docket. They're looking for a number of opportunities for federal levels and provincial levels of government to further enhance investment into the work that they're doing. But I know in terms of a lot of our Vineland Growers, for example, and a lot of our businesses are definitely looking from the horticultural side to be a little bit of a leader in agri-tech innovation. So that is one element that I'm sure would be definitely beneficial to not only Lincoln's agriculture community, but keeping in mind that Byland Research is both a regional and provincial campus that a lot of different businesses tap into.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Mr. Dan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Rinjima, don't go shy on me. I know you had your hand up twice. Do you have a question?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, it was a statement I was going to make earlier on to the conversation about the work that's going on in the economic development tourism area. I wanted to let everybody know that that Mr. Deanne and Basilewski, I don't want to mispronounce it, and Mr. Rotz are meeting, have arranged to meet regularly with the Chamber of Commerce to talk about initiatives that are going on both at the town and at the chamber level, and just to coordinate and make sure that there's not duplication of services, and to just make sure that everybody's getting the best value that they can. So I want to let everybody know that that's happening, and thank Economic Development and Tourism very much for that.
Thank you, Councillor Rinjima, for those comments.
Thank you.
Councillor Michalak, could you just take the chair for just a few minute minutes for me to make a couple of comments, please?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Councillor Bruning.
Thank you, Chair Michalak. First of all, when I took the chair, Liliana, you were off to the side. You weren't in my Hollywood squares, and I made a reference to the team, and bad on me for not including you in the team. You're a vital part of the communication team of this whole, which is now aligned completely across my screen. So I just wanted to, I appreciate the CAO bringing you into the fold and getting the accolades that you truly deserve. I think, when Councillor Patriva talks about what we're doing, I mean, you just got to look at this picture and say, who would have thought that outdoor travel would have moved to Beamsville 2 years ago? Who would have thought Cole's Florist would be considering moving to Beamsville? And look at what's going on Bartlett Avenue with an industrial project. Unbelievable. Mr. Deanne, I'd like you to talk just for a few minutes when we talk about money that we brought in, talk about funding and the youth skills studio that we brought to Lincoln.
Thank you, Chair, and a great opportunity to highlight our Youth Skills Studio. So as members of council know, that our partnership with Civic Connect to develop the Youth Skills Studio is a key component of activating our economic development strategy. Keeping in mind that the Youth Skills Studio is meant to support not only our existing or our businesses here in Lincoln, but also support talent attraction into our community showcase that Lincoln is a great place to work, but also youth retention as well. It's not only just in Niagara, but recognizing that our economy isn't an island unto itself. It is supporting youth throughout the region as well. So it is a key component. I know a lot of my economic development colleagues, both in the region and throughout the province, quite frankly, are looking over our shoulder to see what we're doing, and quite envious of the money that we've been able to bring in and the accomplishments we've been able to make. And I know we had targeted over 90 youth in our initial application. I think we're trending at about 130 now in phase one of this project. So we're actually presenting to Economic Development, the Economic Development Conference in Ontario next week, presenting our Youth Skills Studio, showcase the benefits we've been able to accomplish over the past year, and the fact that we've been able to highlight that is a key component. So it's a great program, Councillor, and I appreciate you bringing it up. And we're looking to extend that into subsequent years, and hopefully a good announcement on that coming up soon.
Awesome, great. The only other comment I would make is I know when we launched the Niagara Benchlands at In on the 20 a few weeks ago, Councillor Timmers was there, Councillor Patriva was there, Mayor Easton was obviously there. I just wish that everyone in the town of Lincoln would have an opportunity to been there and hear the comments that were being made across the province about what's happening in Lincoln. We just qualified for the World Cup for Canadian soccer, and the coach said, "We're coming, and the rest of the world will find out what we're all about." That's kind of what's happening here in Lincoln when it comes to tourism. We're just getting going. We're coming. Watch out. Thank you, Chair Mikulik.
Chair Mikulik, if I may just quickly, Councilor Bernay, I totally agree with you in terms of Lincoln, or us showcasing what Lincoln has to offer on the tourism hospitality side of things. And I know the tourism summit that we launched, in February was very well received. But if I may just share just a moment to turn to Ms. Pazuski to talk a little bit about the launch of our Niagara Benchlands destination brand.
Awesome.
Thank you, Mr. Deaney. Through you, Councillor Russell or Chair Russell, over to Councillor Bernay. Just some quick comments on where we're at in launching this new project. 2 years of the hardest hit sector. What we keep saying here, both locally as well as at the province, is we're not quite through it yet. We're not through the pandemic. Our businesses still need ongoing support. They need advocacy. And we're doing that by creating short-term wins in our local tourism sector. So as you know, a brand name is just a name in a vacuum. How we activate this is by bringing investment, bringing talent, and activating the assets we have right here in our own backyard, taking those jewels in the crown, those craft beverage sector, our agricultural powerhouse. We have the Lincoln Museum and Cultural Center right here in our backyard. Together, these make one amazing world-class destination. And the Niagara Benchlands new destination brand is really our ship to be able to sail Lincoln into that world-class echelon and put us on the world map here, not only in the Niagara tourism realm, but also provincially, nationally, and internationally as a brand new destination, and carve out a market share for Lincoln in this tourism voice.
Thank you, Brittany. I just wanted to say that I did pick up my Benchland bag in my mailbox, and I put some adult treats in it to bring to some friend's house. We were going for a visit, and I said to my wife, we'll just leave the bag at my friend's house, and share it and spread it, and let them see it too. And she said, no, we're not leaving that bag. We're bringing it home. So she liked the bag. My wife liked that bag and liked the message on it. And I hope that more people are able to, to receive one of those bags. I thought, you see them all the time, but she actually wanted to take the bag back. So I was pleasantly surprised by that. Chair Bernay, back to you.
Thank you, Councillor. So there being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Pachariba to receive and file for information report AD-03-22 regarding the Economic Development and Tourism 2021 year in review. And I will now ask your Deputy Clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
Mayor Easton?
Yes.
Councillor Mikulik?
Yes.
Councillor Pachariba?
Yes.
Councillor Russell?
Yes.
Councillor Regima?
Yes.
And Chair.
Yes.
Thank you. That carries.
Thank you, Deputy Clerk. We have no confidential items this evening. Agenda item number 11, committee remarks. Do any committee members have any remarks or comments at this time?
I do, Mr. Chair.
I'm seeing Councillor Russell, and I'll go to you, Mayor Easton.
Sure.
Go ahead, Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, likely to our CAO, but possibly to Mr. Deaney. Again, unfortunately, I know that Director McKay is not here tonight. Neither is our clerk, Ms. Kirkolos. But I did receive a message from one of our residents tonight, Kirsten McCauley, and she had wondered, again, to Councillor Renee point earlier about where Lincoln is going and all the exciting things that are happening. She had asked whether or not the town of Lincoln has ever discussed having a committee designated to inclusion, social equity, and diversity. I know that there is one at the region. So again, I said I would definitely pass it along tonight for consideration, likely something maybe for next term. But I just wanted to throw that out to our CAO. to see if he has any thoughts on if that is something that we could maybe examine further down the road.
Great question, Councillor. Mr. CAO, would you like to comment on that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, let me start and probably pass it over to Sarah, I think, to comment on it. I know we've had conversations both internally as well as with some stakeholder groups. So something that's on the horizon, something that's coming, but I think Sarah can provide you a little bit of an update.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Russell. Currently, I am a staff representative who's seated on the Inclusive Municipalities Coalition, which is led by the region, as you mentioned. So all of the municipalities in Niagara have representation on that. And some of the municipalities have standalone committees. They all have kind of varying names depending on who has one and who doesn't. So at this point in time, there's been some early discussions about perhaps having a committee, like you mentioned, for West Niagara, similar to the model that the Joint Accessibility Advisory Committee is using, and that isn't necessarily feasible to have one in each and every municipality, but could we pool together some efforts to have one perhaps larger committee? So that would be something that we would appreciate and look to council's direction to move forward in the new term of council, perhaps.
Councillor Russell, you okay with
Yeah,
that?
no, thank you very much. I think that's great, and I'm sure Ms. McCauley would be very appreciative that is possibly moving forward. And I hope that we have the opportunity to give some more thoughts onto that as we close out this term and set the next term up for success. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for bringing it forward, Mayor Easton.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we had some pretty interesting reports come forward tonight, important reports. And certainly the Q4 financial report was one of those. I always look forward to getting the update on where things are going. And I just want to speak again about the review, the compensation review. And not only that seems to be almost the outcome of a key review that's underway around validating work that we need to have done at the town, the skills that are needed to do that, positions that will be required, and then finally, how much are we going to pay people? So I don't want to leave anybody with the idea that there isn't an openness about this process. I think it's very, very open. We have had discussions in the past about compensation, but we do it on a very, very macro level. And I do believe that we should have some concern, we should have some considerable concern, every employer should, in terms of job security and the clarity that goes around with that. So I think on the aggregate, that what's coming up is very appropriate and very beneficial. I do believe that knowing what every person does and where they do that work and who they work with, because in many cases, I believe that what the CAO has been hiring is a team that has specialty skills, but they are general specialists because they have this ability to come together and work with other people who have quite different skills. And they seem to be, they have that ability to work problems through in order to achieve things, for example, like really exemplary parks that have been developed. Some of these projects that involve public works and planning and community services. I don't know that everybody is comfortable doing that, but we certainly have a team here that is very good in this regard. So I wanted to comment on that because my remarks about cats is just, my patience with the political process, which I don't think is very complimentary of a lot of the hard work that is done. But I do believe, I absolutely do support that it should be a very, very open process and that there should be opportunity for us to discuss it, both in camera and publicly as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mary Easton. Seeing no other hands, there being no further business, I now call this meeting adjourned at 8:44. Good evening, everyone.